European powers have looked away as well. Despite broad public consensus that genocide should never again be allowed, and a good deal of triumphalism about the ascent of liberal democratic values, the last decade of the 20th century was one of the most deadly in the grimmest century on record. Rwandan Hutus in 1994 could freely, joyfully, and systematically slaughter 8,000 Tutsi a day for 100 days without any foreign interference. Genocide occurred after the Cold War, after the growth of human rights groups, after the advent of technology that allowed for instant communication, after the erection of the Holocaust Museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C. Perversely, America's public awareness of the Holocaust often seemed to set the bar for concern so high that we were able to tell ourselves that contemporary genocides were not measuring up. As the writer David Reef noted, never again might best be defined as never again would Germans kill Jews in Europe in the 1940s. Either by averting their eyes or attending to more pressing conventional, strategic, and political concerns, U.S. leaders who have denounced the Holocaust have themselves repeatedly allowed genocide. What is most shocking about America's reaction to Turkey's killing of Armenians, the Holocaust, Pol Pot's reign of terror, Iraq's slaughter of the Kurds, Bosnian Serbs' mass murder of Muslims, and the Hutu elimination of Tutsi, is not that the United States refused to deploy U.S. ground forces to combat the atrocities. For much of the century, even the most ardent interventionists did not lobby for U.S. ground invasions. What is most shocking is that U.S. policymakers did almost nothing to deter the crime. Because America's vital national interests were not considered imperiled by mere genocide, senior U.S. officials did not give genocide the moral attention it warranted.
Well, hello, folks. Paying attention to what's going on in the world often makes me feel cynical and fills me full of ironic humor as a kind of defense mechanism, because I can't look away and seeing what's happening today and knowing history a bit, I'm filled with disappointment. And so I get cynical. So I want to stop it, but it's hard. Anyway, I listened to the conclusion of A Problem from Hell. It's very interesting, and I'll play a little bit of that for you in a minute at the end of the video. But I just wanted to say that we always think that Germans killed Jews in the 1930s and 40s. And we don't realize that genocide is a human thing. And I don't know if you can get the irony or the connection, but the word genocide was invented in 1948. So what happened in 1947 in the Middle East? Anyway. Genocide is perpetrated by people. It doesn't really matter where you're from in the world. And we tend to forget that. And the great powers don't pay attention because most of the time it's not in their interest. And making peace is a complex and difficult thing. And intervention to stop or to prevent genocide is costly. At the end of the day, you might have to spend some of your lives, spend the lives of the people in the most powerful empire to stop it. Preventing it means you might have to compromise on some of your interests, geopolitical interests and so on, economic interests. It's very hard to win in politics if you're going to do something like that. So this is a problem. It's never going to go away. Yeah, I saw the news. I'm thinking, there's the biggest shopping mall in the world in Houston or somewhere. And there's a bad guy in there. And in order to get the bad guy, you're justified in killing everyone at the shopping mall because the bad guy is just like all those other people in the shopping mall, except he's a bad guy and the other people are innocent. But you can rationalize it. You can justify it. It's not that hard. And then, of course, year by year, it gets crazier and crazier. Someday you'll be able to say, well, there's 100 bad guys over there in that territory. So maybe it's just more efficient and better for everyone if we get it over quickly and just drop a nuke on it. And maybe it is. And people will rationalize it and they'll justify it. It won't be that hard. And a lot of people will sit back and not pay attention, not bother to notice because it's not comfortable to pay attention or to notice things like this. Other people know that their career depends on them not paying much attention to the details and perhaps sitting on their hands when really bad things are happening. And of course, if it's not profitable, if it's not lucrative, why bother? Other people think that, this is just God's plan. The time has finally come after all those horrific and terrible incidents of the past. Hells on earth that people couldn't imagine could get worse. Maybe it's time, and we have been painting ourselves into a corner for decades, knowing the dangers of certain things. And so some faithful people, good people, can justify it, can rationalize it. It's really not that hard. I just really hope that it doesn't happen to you, my friends. So I'll play some of that from the conclusion of A Problem from Hell, America in the Era of Genocide. And just keep in mind that it's 2023 and the era of genocide is still with us. We're still in that era. And we probably will be until the end of days. Buliam out.
The Screamers succeeded in reaching listeners for a moment, Kessler wrote, only to watch them shake themselves like puppies who have got their fur wet and return to the blissful place of ignorance and uninvolvement. You can convince them for an hour, Kessler noted, but then their mental half-defense begins to work, and in a week, the shrug of incredulity has returned like a reflex temporarily weakened by shock. Most of those who protested U.S. policy initially believed that if they could only succeed in conveying the horrors to those who had not borne witness, the community of listeners, local, national, international, would act. They possessed faith in the institutions to which they had offered allegiance. Lemkin, the immigrant, believed in the United States. There was no doubt in his mind that this country would adopt his crusade and ratify and enforce the Genocide Convention. William Proxmire, the quixotic senator, believed the convention had not been ratified because of some quirk in the legislative process. When he pledged to give a speech a day in the Senate, he thought Senate backlogs would mean a year-long campaign at most. Although Peter Galbraith was aware of the potency of special interests on Capitol Hill, He believed that there were certain lines that U.S. lawmakers would not see crossed. Romeo Dallaire believed in the promise and nobility of the United Nations, which would never abandon citizens it had promised to protect. And the State Department protesters believed in the department. They were prepared to utilize the dissent channel to speak out in the open forum and to send heartfelt memos to the Secretary of State. They believed that never again would the United States allow men and women to be herded into concentration camps in Europe where they would be starved, raped, and murdered. All of the latter-day screamers treated silence as if it were a further crime against humanity. They invoked the Holocaust analogy because they thought it would help them link a current crisis with a past tragedy and a current decision to abstain with a past decision to appease. Most of them saw opportunity and alternative, where others felt trapped by inevitability and reality. A reality they did not probe and therefore ultimately would not alter. They knew that it was individuals who would have to make a difference, which was not the same as believing that they would. They were usually branded emotional, irrational, soft, or naive. Many of them saw their careers destroyed by the stands they took. Some crumbled. A few, like Dallaire, may never recover. Because of the way the stories turned out, and indeed because of the way genocide keeps turning out, it is easy to view these individuals as overly credulous or politically obtuse. But how many of us who look back at the genocides of the 20th century, including the Holocaust, do not believe that these people were right? How many of us do not believe that the presidents, senators, bureaucrats, journalists, and ordinary citizens who did nothing, choosing to look away rather than to face hard choices and wrenching moral dilemmas, were wrong? And how can something so clear in retrospect become so muddled at the time by rationalizations, institutional constraints, and a lack of imagination? How can it be that those who fight on behalf of these principles are the ones deemed unreasonable? George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." After a century of doing so little to prevent, suppress, and punish genocide, Americans must join and thereby legitimate the ranks of the unreasonable.